We're excited to have the opportunity to speak with you today. We're going over part 2 of 2 of migrating to Windows 10. Part 1 of 2 is located on cortexservices.com website /event. Today with me we have Chris Shalba and myself, Clint Adkins. Chris, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Clint. Yeah, so I've been working with Cortex for now just under 10 years. And I really started off doing consulting work a lot in the kind of desktop space and also servers, virtualization, and migrations, and kind of worked up to working with some of the more complicated and complex migrations that we've had, and a lot in System Center and started working with Windows 10. And just recently I've become a solution architect, which means that I'm working with customers to develop those solutions of especially in terms of this is Windows 10 migrations, where they go, how they get there, that type of thing, and just kind of developing that strategy for them and figuring out how we can help them get there.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Chris. And my name is Clint Adkins. I'm a practice manager at Cortex Services. I have worked in the desktop infrastructure space for many years, almost 20 years, and primarily working on large desktop migrations. I've implemented from a technical perspective as well as from a management perspective various sizes of migrations from 500 devices to 130,000 plus. My current role, I do manage program manage large implementations of Windows 10 platforms. So today we're going to be covering the overall economic impact of Windows 10, where to begin, what the migration methodology is, and managing the process. We'll be going through some questions and answers at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions, please ask via GoToWebinar's chat feature, and Karen, who is moderating this event, will store them up and ask at the end of the presentation. Let's go ahead and get started. So Windows 10, from an economic perspective, business leaders have wanted to know the financials of Windows 10 and how it impacts their business. Forrester has analyzed the total impact, economic impact of Windows 10. With Windows 10, IT and employee productivity are more improved, and third-party license costs are reduced or eliminated. Client managers can recover devices within 20 minutes per day, as well as deployments are also significantly faster than past implementations. So the three key things that I wanted to hit out of this are talking about the 15% of savings in IT desktop management. Windows 10 requires less administration, IT administration, time to install, manage, and support. 33% of reduction in security issues and time to resolve those issues. 25% of reduction in employee time previously unavailable for work, especially mobile users or remote users. I know a lot of companies are struggling with remote worker solutions as a whole, and this can truly help. If you want a copy of that Forrester economic impact, please let us know and we can provide that to you. So where do we begin with Windows 10? When we look at large migrations like this, we look at these 4 key challenges, and we'll go into each of them. So looking at design considerations, Windows 10 you face a number of new key challenges from a design perspective. If you think about all the security functionality that we went over in part 1 of this webinar series, there are so many design considerations you have to go through, and we're going to get into some more detail about that. Software compatibility with Win 10, hardware requirements, and then any sort of user data that's on the local devices. So Chris, why don't we jump into the design considerations?
Sure. Sure. So here's just like a high-level view of some of the considerations that I think need to be top of mind. It's not, I wouldn't say, a comprehensive list. We're going to dive deeper into some of this and go over these real quick, and then we'll dive into them more. So first is the version of Windows 10. You got to decide where, which one you're going to go with. Now there are considerations both on a financial side, of course, but also from a feature perspective.
Yeah.
Right. And there's different capabilities one versus the other. So you have to understand what your business needs and what you need to go with. And we've even seen some customers that are considering maybe even going with one, some users using one and more users using the other, like Pro versus Enterprise. They maybe don't, because Enterprise obviously it does cost a little bit more, right?
Yep.
Next is new security features. Like Clint mentioned in part one, we went through some of those compelling reasons why a lot of organizations are going with Windows 10, and a lot of that really is around security. And we'll get a little deeper into that, and really to illustrate that point of there are a lot of new features that are really great for your organization that you need to start considering on the early side, kind of planning stages, right, before you start just moving forward with the implementation. There's now also the considerations of how you get Windows 10 to the device. There's different methods now of actually applying the Windows 10 image that have been introduced. We'll get a little bit deeper in there, but a couple of ones you may not have seen before is like in-place upgrade and dynamic provisioning. Those are definitely new, but we still have the traditional wipe and load and those new PC replacement scenarios. When we're talking about mobility, like Clint mentioned, is that the mobile workforce and keeping them productive out there, and also making sure their devices are secure. There's now another option in terms of, you used to only have domain join options. You have the devices inside your network, you join the domain, and most of the time inside there you can manage them that way. But now if you have users that are outside the network, organizations have had a lot of challenges of how do you maintain connectivity to those devices, to manage them if you need to wipe them, lock them down, push software, whatever. Azure AD Join is another option out there for maybe some of your users to enable some of that mobility there. Office deployment, that's something that, I mean, every organization we're talking with they have Office, right? Yeah. So, there's the traditional Office, the 2013, 2016 now, right, Professional Plus, that's the normal bits you put on there, MSI install, right, which is still viable today, right? But a lot of organizations have seen the value of Office 365. And one of the values of that, especially too, besides all the services that are involved with it, is that Office package that gets installed. It's installed a little bit differently. It's kind of, if you guys are familiar with AppV, it's similar to that. So it takes a little bit different methodology of installing it, applying the settings, and also keeping it up to date. So just things that you have to look at and plan for, and what you want to do with your image. Now, getting to your image is how you get that image of whatever you decide to do to your devices, right? And then doing the ongoing management and getting the applications to the device as well. Well, what we see a lot out there, especially enterprise organizations, even organizations a few hundred users and up, we're seeing too, is configuration manager, right? System Center Configuration Manager is the big dog, I'd say, right, in the fight there.
Yeah, absolutely. They definitely beat Novell a little while ago. So
I'd say so. And there's still other ones that are out there that can work pretty well. It's just that the idea is that you have an integrated solution here. Microsoft is working in tandem with the Config Manager team to make sure that all the features from Windows 10 can be managed by Config Manager, and that all these different scenarios from a deployment aspect are all being considered. And really, when it comes down to it, Config Manager is managing over 80% of the enterprise devices globally. So I mean, it's been out there for a while. It's really tried and true and tested. Very powerful tool, right?
Yeah, and really the reason why we put it as systems management and application deployment tool sets is well obviously we are big advocates of SCCM, but whatever systems management tool you're going to leverage, make sure that's part of the design and understand all the different capabilities and make sure you're using them. So if you're using other tools, whatever that may be, just make sure you're incorporating that as part of your design.
Absolutely, yeah. But it all comes down to with Windows 10. I think there's just more planning involved on the front end, right? And then you can really make it a smooth transition with that. Now, VDI impact. So, VDI is something we start hearing about. We're hearing about a lot with organizations. We're helping actually implement that for a lot of organizations as well. And what's interesting was with Windows 10, with the new modern devices, the 2-in-1s, the tablets, you got touch capabilities, inking. There's some different kind of ways to interact with your devices. And up until Windows 10, that was not a very good experience in VDI. You really didn't bring over much of that to your local workstation, right? So, but what Microsoft's done is they've really found this parity, this way to bring that full experience to those modern devices that you have through a VDI session. So the user really doesn't realize that it's actually remotely being delivered to their device. So that's really something that's huge. Those organizations look at that. Now with VDI, it's usually not an all or nothing type of situation, right? If you see, you're not going to see necessarily an organization do all VDI, right? But there's probably some good use cases out there for different parts of your organization that might make sense for, right? So you really have to understand your users, your workflows, and see where that fits from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think the real bottom line is Windows 10 has really been optimized for a VDI type experience. But again, pointing out what Chris was saying is your organization won't be, I shouldn't say won't be, but I haven't seen it personally where an organization is all VDI or all traditional desktops. When you have that mix, it's probably the most optimal solution for your customers, your users.
Absolutely. So it's always considering that, right?
Right.
From the productivity, the security, compliance, there's a lot there. And then update servicing. We'll dive into this a little bit more in a minute here, but you have to consider that too. With Windows 10, it's just different from what it has been traditionally. So we'll kind of illustrate that in a minute here. So starting off with just comparing those different the different options for Windows 10. Up until just recently, you really had the Pro and Enterprise. Enterprise E3, as you see here, is what it was just Enterprise, right? So since there's now some more features that they wanted to give another tier for those customers that would like those additional features, they now have Enterprise E3 and E5. So this kind of illustrates the point where Pro, you can get that already installed on a device that you get from your a manufacturer, vendor, OEM type of thing, and it will have some of the features, right? That some of these great new features here that are very valuable. But if your organization, through the planning and design kind of phases of a project, looking at Windows 10, determine that you might need to have some of these more in-depth security features and some of these other pieces from a productivity standpoint, that's when you want to start looking at Enterprise, right? So just calling out a couple of things just from security. I think we talked about Credential Guard, Advice Guard last week for our other webinar. So those are very important security features. Direct access is another big one. I know we have some customers that they need at least some of their users to be on Enterprise so that you can use direct access. And we were talking about the mobility, right? Right,
absolutely. That's a great solution for specifically remote users, especially users who are working from home more as business continues to change and you have more mobile users. That's a critical aspect.
Absolutely. And other things from the access management and deployment here, being able to manage the user experience a little bit more, so being able to customize a start menu and group icons and make it kind of curate that for your users, and managing the Windows Store, those types of pieces. Enterprise, that's really where it's at.
And real quick, the last piece about the enterprise, enterprise licenses can be purchased, and we mentioned this in two different manners. You can either purchase through your traditional enterprise agreement, or you can purchase them through a CSP provider, which is a Microsoft partner that is able to resell the enterprise license.
Yeah, and what's different as well too is you can do that on a per user basis now, as opposed to just the traditional per device. So that unlocks a few more different ways of doing this, especially if you have mobile users. That just adds to your capabilities.
Yeah, and I think per users they're allowed to install Windows 10 on, is it 5 devices?
5 devices, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So getting into the security features. So this kind of shows you in a way from a Windows 7, Windows 8 type of devices in security-wise, where you would have these are the base security features for Windows 10. You know, your firewall, your BitLocker, and if you were to kind of install Windows 10 without really thinking through all the other types of security features out there, not maybe enabling some prerequisites that you need for the rest of them, this might be all you really can do out of the gate, and potentially long term. Now,
which by the way is still a step up.
Oh, absolutely.
From Windows 7, right? It's still much more secure. It is I think it is a better platform for users. I think the look and feel of Windows 10 is really nice.
Absolutely. But see, from here you can see all these blue boxes here. When you do the planning and you maybe set a couple policies, you make sure that through the imaging process, some settings are set at that point in time. You can unlock all the rest of these with Windows 10 Enterprise, especially. Of it's specifically around device protection and even threat resistance. A lot of those do depend on some pieces of hardware, like you hear like a TPM chip, which is a little hardware chip that stores credentials securely and secrets there, and virtualization-based security, UEFI. Those are things that have to be set you have to be thinking about these things before you deploy to make sure that you have those in place. And then that also then unlocks other things like Credential Guard and Windows Hello, and the capability of doing more of these security features here. So, and on modern devices, pretty much all modern devices, as they call them, that are certified for Windows 10 are going to have the capabilities of running all of this. So, getting into kind of the deployment choices and your deployment options here. Like I said, there's a couple new ones that are available to us now. We'll go through these here. So, in-place upgrade. Now, Microsoft has developed this to be pretty much the preferred option for enterprises that have existing devices. Now, at the same time, like I said on the last slide, you do have to have certain things in place to really take advantage of this. If you're only on 32-bit, you want to go to 64-bit, you don't have UEFI, it may not be a great option. But for those devices that, especially like Windows, like Surface 3s, Surface Pro 3s, and other devices that already kind of have some of these features set up in our 64-bit, this is a very, very seamless way to get to Windows 10. And you can go from Windows 7, 8, 8.1. It allows you to roll back very easily. If there's any sort of problem at all, you can roll back. It's like it never even happened. There's no impact to those users.
Yeah, and I think the other key part about that is the reliability of it.
Absolutely, yep.
It truly is a reliable upgrade. It's not like old, if you remember back in the day, upgrading to Windows 7 from XP. There were some upgrade paths for home users, not for enterprises, of course, but for home users, and it was kind of unreliable and kludgy. This really is a enterprise class upgrade solution.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you're going to keep the same, apps on there, and you're going to keep all the data on there, it just takes you from where you are, Windows 7 or 8, and gets you to Windows 10. So you're not going to be doing a lot of different customizations, changing things out while you're doing this. So we might see this with the organizations we've come across. There's usually a subset of devices that this makes sense for. This will not work for probably every single device that an organization has, right? So just to illustrate that, I think here again, just to show, you replace the operating system, you can pull the new drivers down there, and the apps that are compatible with this will just work. That's just built here. So the idea is that it's a lot easier and faster. So Forrester did another study to see how much labor time it took, like an actual technician, like desktop deployment tech, to do your traditional wipe and load versus doing an in-place upgrade. I mean, it's like only 5 minutes versus like a 60-minute amount of labor that is required from that tech. So it's just something to consider. There's also with something we're going to touch on a little later, I think too, is there's this new service called Upgrade Analytics. It's a public preview right now. It helps you to understand where your devices are at today and which ones would be eligible to do this, so that you can identify kind of that low-hanging fruit, let's say. All right. So the next provisioning choice, deployment choice is provisioning. This is a new methodology here too. Now this is really just for new devices that are coming out of the box. They already have Windows 10 on them. All right. This is not from re-imaging devices. So it has a clean version of Windows 10 on there. That, of course, when you get it from an OEM, it has the drivers on it. It's already set up. Typically, it might have Pro on it. Well, what provisioning you do is you can take that hardware right off the shelf and apply this provisioning package. It can upgrade it to the enterprise SKU right away. It can also install apps and then your configurations for your enterprise, like VPN configurations, Wi-Fi, profile, certificates. Set some of the settings like you would in some ways, like a group policy type of thing. Sure. And then can you even enroll the device managed by a mobile device management solution, for example, like Intune. But there are pretty much most of the major ones out there can manage Windows 10 now too. And so it really quickly gets a user to using a device that works, right? Why reinstall all the drivers that already came from the manufacturer that work, right? And go through wiping everything off to put it back on. So this is another thing to consider. It's a little bit of a paradigm shift from, oh no, we need to have our standard image and wipe and load type thing. So you have to consider that does that work for your organization? Maybe for remote users and getting them, if they have a device they need to get imaged because it's outside network, right? That might be a good option. And of course the traditional wipe and load, right? Where if you're going to be updating multiple apps, going 32-bit, 64-bit, at the same time as imaging the OS, trying to get UEFI from BIOS, or you already have some issues on the device. It's not a super clean OS. Maybe your users have local admin privileges, and who knows what they did. You probably might still want to go with a wipe and load to get to a standard image there. But there have been some improvements there. I mean, with application compatibility and driver issues have been mitigated. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And you can do this in a very automated way, especially with Config Manager. So thinking through that deployment strategy and as well with the servicing of Windows and updates, there's what they call different branches here. So you're going to have a Windows Insider branch that's very early release, that's pre-release. You have a current branch for your early adopters, and just making sure that everything's going to work by the time you get to current branch for business, which is really for broad deployment across your organization. So this kind of illustrates that. And then there's long-term servicing branch. This is really like mission-critical systems, like you're talking like heart rate monitors and like missile control systems type of thing. It's not meant to be broadly used for those. It's very specialized systems.
Yeah, and real quick, for those of you who are unfamiliar with a Windows servicing or current branch and current branch for business, ultimately that is now Microsoft's release version of the operating system. And every migration, Windows 10 migration that companies are going through, part of that design and that design consideration has to be planning this long-term strategy, whether that is how you pilot your normal patches today and expanding that. I have not seen a company's pilot group large enough for patches, large enough to support this new model. But you can expand your current process and allow it to make sure you're testing software compatibility with each of these branch releases. And we'll get into that here a little bit more as well, but just want to make sure everybody understands this is the way Microsoft is keeping the Windows up to date long term. And everybody's heard Windows 10. This is the last operating system deployment that you're going to need to go through, right?
Yep.
That's because of these branches.
Yep. And the idea is that these are incremental updates. It's not these really huge updates that are coming out every few years. It's just these are happening, every few months type of thing. They're coming out with new features, but the idea is that the business can control when some of these features go out to different people in the organization. It just makes sense to have some users on the early releases so that you can validate that everything is going to be smooth. And when you get to the current branch of business, or give Microsoft feedback so they can fix something.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, and I have personally seen new branch releases with apps incompatible. A customer of ours has McAfee antivirus, and the virus version, the engine version they had was incompatible with the recent branch release for Windows 10. Now, obviously, McAfee had updated their client, and this customer was able to as well to mitigate it, but they found that out through this testing process.
Yep, makes sense. Yeah, and that's why it's important to be planning ahead, right, and to be putting these pieces in place. And so this also illustrates here, and I have a couple more diagrams of showing kind of the release cycle and the how often these releases come out. Like every 6 months, there's current branch that eventually turns into current branch for business, and you want to be looking at starting to roll out like your current branch for business about 4 months or so after current branch is released as well. And the idea around this too is that there's been all this testing that's done even before it gets to this current branch for business, where internally Microsoft are testing, and then Insider Preview, there's several million people on that, from consumers to enterprises. Current branch from consumer to enterprise, hundreds of millions on there. It really gives the diversity of testing out all these different permutations of applications, drivers, hardware, and surfacing any of these issues earlier on, so that by the time current branch for business is released, all this stuff is fixed, and it's a very smooth transition. But as you can see here, there's internal things with current branch for business. You can still determine within your organization when that gets rolled out in phases to your users, right? In terms of how it changes in their testing.
So right? For those critical areas, perhaps they'll be later in the range.
Absolutely. And so that release life cycle here, just in a diagram here, just shows how you get the feedback. You go to release, and you start piloting with like your current branch, and then from a production standpoint, you get current branch for business out to that organization. And you're going to have like 12 to 22 months. You could stay theoretically on a current branch for business build before it's out of support. So you have a lot of time there. Yeah. Microsoft actually changed some of the way that they've done this. They were a little too aggressive early on, but they received the feedback. Yeah. And they've done a really great job of adjusting to make sure that businesses can be successful with this. And I really think that they did a great job with it now. So this kind of shows from the different updates that we've had so far, and what might be common, kind of illustrating how these overlap, right? You're always going to have at least two releases supported in the market at a time, and that's going to span that 12 to 22 months time frame. So yeah, this is kind of your piece here, Clint, because I mean, from a migration standpoint, you've really gone through a lot of these, and I know we've gotten a lot of insights and experience from this. So I think sharing some of that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So fundamentally, from a migration perspective, I'm a firm believer in establishing a solid methodology and leveraging project management best practices. So I recommend going through discovery phases, design phase, test, deploy, and then formally close the project as well, which is something that a lot of people miss at the end and kind of let it linger for a while. But as we dive into each of these phases, you'll find out a little bit more, some key activities. Now, these aren't everything that should be done during them, but generally speaking, these are some of your key activities you need to make sure that you accomplish. So in discovery, you got to understand your hardware, your applications, where users keep your data, right? So a lot of people have moved it to redirecting My Documents to their home drive, or potentially rolled out OneDrive for Business or something along those lines, but really understanding applications data or users data and where it is. You review your imaging and your imaging process, Windows 10 features, and decide on the decide on the version that you're going to go forward with. VDI options, right? Are you rolling out VDI as part of this? Is it a separate scope altogether, or are you combining them? And then additional tools such as SCM, Altiris, or other sort of tools that you may need to upgrade, because certain versions of SCCM are not compatible to, or not capable of managing Windows 10 devices, or at least in a full feature set perspective. So you may need to consider that as part of it. Right. So from a hardware perspective, I mean, where I always start is understanding the assets and what you have. Fortunately, from a Windows 10 perspective, the minimum requirements are similar to that of Windows 7, if not the same, I think. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, very similar.
Yeah, and so fortunately, we're in a great place from that perspective for minimum requirements, but I definitely recommend maybe beefing up some of your hardware to run it just to make sure your users have optimal performance. But some of the things you can leverage from a tool set perspective are things like Lakeside Systrack or Citrix App DNA to understand inventory and usage, app compatibility, use your systems management tool to discover your hardware, perhaps compare that to your ITSM solution for your asset management, so if that's ServiceNow or whatever the case may be. Definitely use those systems and use them as part of your tool set. And then we'll get into this here in a few minutes, but Chris mentioned this earlier, the new product or new release from Microsoft, the Upgrade Analytics service, is something that you may be able to look at as well.
Yeah, I can touch on that real quick.
So yeah.
So this is at least a new service that Microsoft's released. It's free. It's in public preview right now, which this is what Microsoft's been doing with a lot of their services. They get into public preview while they're still kind of working out some of, how does it look, some of the features. Maybe there's a couple tiny bugs, but honestly, most public preview services I've used are pretty solid. Yeah. But the idea here is that it's using telemetry from your existing devices and feeding that up to a cloud service. And some of you might be familiar with OMS, the Operation Management Suite. Mm-hmm. It uses that dashboard to surface this information and gain insights out of it, right? To know which devices are eligible to upgrade, which ones should you run a pilot on first, and some of these maybe application issues that it can surface for you right out of the gate. So really, you can accelerate that the piloting process and getting to a solid image and dealing with those applications earlier on rather than later, so that you're being more proactive, really, is what it comes down to. Really cool tool. Like I said, just came out. We're just starting to use that on some of these environments, and I'm really looking forward to all the additional features that they're going to continue to add to it.
Yeah, and this is one of those tools I personally have not used, but my understanding of it is it's taken another step in those in the right direction for being able to leverage for these kind of migrations. Some of you guys may be familiar with Microsoft ACT, Application Compatibility Toolkit. It was used heavily with XP to Windows 7 migrations. Well, it gave you so much data, it was so hard to work with. My understanding with this is it does simplify that quite a bit. Yeah. So it's definitely something worth looking at and seeing and evaluating during that discovery phase that'll help you. And it also compares known applications. Yes. Specifically, that's a big one. Is it compares known applications compatibility versions. Yeah. So. Yeah,
vendors can put information in this service from the other customers, what they've seen automatically aggregates this information. So there's a lot of intelligence you just couldn't get on your own.
Yep.
And so, yeah.
And it probably won't be the end-all be-all for you either, right? But it is a tool that you can use.
Absolutely.
So from an application perspective, so as you're looking at your application and management, you got to look at budgeting, right? How many apps do you have? What's the cost of them? Rationalization, and I'll talk about that here in a second. Testing, and then deployment of the software as a whole. But one thing from a rationalization perspective, if you don't have an application portfolio management system or process, I highly recommend you implement one during this migration. And the reason why is this application portfolio management systems are very challenging to implement outside of desktop refreshes. They absolutely can be done. They are done all the time outside of it, but it just is more challenging. Right now you're touching all the applications. You have the ability to rationalize and understand the business problem that the software solves, and are there multiple pieces of software that do the same job? Yeah. And this is the time when you're in there looking at that. And it is a great opportunity to implement a portfolio management system. And
the idea is that really you can save some money
Yeah,
right? Because
absolutely.
why spend the time packaging apps that you don't need?
Oh.
And they have multiple different types of apps do the same thing.
Managing the
right?
infrastructure,
Yeah.
patching the infrastructure, making sure vulnerabilities, upgrades, software maintenance.
Yeah. So there's a good ROI around that. Right? It comes down to it that you will invest a little bit of money up front, but it could save you a lot of money in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. And the risk of not doing it is, based on the current direction, as we were talking earlier, with Windows servicing, or I believe it's called Windows as a Service, right?
Yep.
Is where Microsoft is releasing branches in order to upgrade the operating system. Microsoft is saying that this is the last operating system that we'll need to deploy. Now, we don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case, but that's the current direction, and I do believe, regardless, it will be the case for a while.
Oh yeah.
I don't know that it will be forever, but I do think it will be at least for a while. That really will be the last big desktop migration you're going to go through. So if you don't do it now, you're going to have to touch all the applications again.
Yep.
From a portfolio management perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So from a design perspective, so obviously Chris had covered a lot of the design considerations earlier, but some other things that you just need to define. What hardware are you going to use? Right? Are you going to use the same standards you had for Windows 7, or are you going to move up to newer, faster hardware? Standardize your app business applications. We just talked about that. App virtualization. Is that a piece of technology that you need as part of this? How will users' data be handled? Right. So if there's any local data, how are you going to handle that? You automate as much as possible. So this is my favorite part about this is automate as much as possible. You should be able to truly get to zero-touch migrations with Windows 10. Windows XP to Windows 7, many people struggled with zero-touch. Obviously, that was the utopia, and many people got to light-touch deployments, meaning someone had to touch the devices just minimally. This, you should be able to get to zero-touch migrations in many cases. If not, at least set yourself up for 100% zero-touch migrations in the future. So automate as much as you can through this process. And then, develop your initial deployment schedule. That will move over time for various reasons, business reasons, application functionality reasons, whatever. There will be hiccups, but build that initial, deployment schedule. And so as part of that design, one thing we wanted to make sure and cover is compatibility in Windows 10. So primarily, this is referring to desktop applications, websites, modern apps, and hardware. So from a desktop perspective, from an app perspective, customers have told Microsoft that compatibility is a key pain point in the OS deployment, and we all know that, right? All of us have lived that. Microsoft understood that and understood the challenge that everybody had migrating from Windows XP to Windows 7 from an app compatibility perspective, and did everything they could to minimize compatibility issues from moving to 7 to 10, or 8 to 10 if you're one of the organizations that moved to 8. But majority of companies are still on Windows 7, so that's why I refer to it as Windows 7 to 10. But Microsoft is saying that 99% of apps are compatible. Now, one key piece to note is that you will still see some potential compatibility challenges more than that 99%. It's not from an operating system compatibility perspective. It's from a feature set and/or security changes that you make. So some common things that impact compatibility with new versions, or with Windows 10 specifically, is when people do things like change from their users from local administrators to standard user privileges. By the way, if you haven't done that yet, you should definitely take the time.
Yep,
absolutely. Yep. UAC enablement, Browser changes, that's a big one, which is covered right here. Internet Explorer does include enterprise mode, which I highly recommend as part of that design feature, which ultimately allows users to use IE11, but use applications that require older versions of Internet Explorer, and can be managed through group policies and some other things. So architecture changes from 32-bit to 64-bit is a common challenge. You don't see too many apps, but you do see some. Microsoft Office version changes. That is the number one biggest one that I personally have seen, is when people are moving from like Office 2010 to Office 365 or 2016, whatever the case may be. Applications that integrate to Office, that's definitely a challenge from a compatibility. And it's a perceived that it's an application challenge, and it is, in fact, because it's an Office change and it doesn't work on the new overall core Windows 10 solution for you. But know that these are common things. OneDrive is another one, people implementing OneDrive and different locations for default save locations, things like that.
And some organizations are looking at this as the opportunity to make all these changes all at once. That adds significant complexity, and you just have to understand that there is more complexity, but it can be overcome by having proper planning, proper testing. This can all be done.
Proper automation.
Proper automation, exactly.
And so really what we wanted to get across is you can have a very successful migration with minimal compatibilities or incompatible applications if Windows 7 is set up and you're keeping the same security features for the most part. If Windows 7 is set up the same way you are in Windows 10. But as you add more of these security features and changes, you do increase your risk of incompatible applications. So another piece of the design is designing how you're going to deliver your applications, and I'm a firm believer in application packaging. Personally, I've been packaging applications or involved with packaging applications since the old Windows 95 days. Ultimately allowing for a standard distribution of your software package across all of your enterprise. So leveraging SCCM or other systems management tools.
Critical to the whole automation thing, right?
Absolutely, incredibly critical. Making sure that the applications, when they're delivered to the user, are configured as needed so that you don't have to send an engineer or a tech out to touch the application and make any sort of configuration changes.
You just have consistency across the organization, less help desk calls overall.
Absolutely. And some key pieces of that are, from a process perspective, is going through QC or QA testing. You have an engineer who packages the applications and works through that process. For those of you who aren't familiar, Flexera is a great tool to manage and do the actual packaging process, creating different MSIs. But you have a packager who goes through the packaging process. Then you have a different engineer doing QC work or QA work of that app and validating that they're meeting your standards, that the package meets your standards, validating that it installs properly and works as expected. And the reason you do that is to ensure that consistency across the organization. And then you go through user acceptance testing. And this is a big one that a lot of people miss, is user acceptance testing is critical in having formal sign-offs from the users, or whether it be application owners or certain end users, power users, depending on your organization, but have the users actually do that test. The test phase is pretty obvious in general. I mean, I think that's one of the key pieces is go through and test your compatibility. Looking at it, you can use different tools such as we mentioned the update analytics. Flexera has a tool, Citrix AppDNA. You can use to help automate. You also the key part with testing is look at all your different components and make sure they're included in your test plan. Because finding it during your testing versus finding a problem during testing versus finding it in production, it's so much easier to deal with in a test environment. And then from a deploy perspective, again, we go back to automation. How can we automate this deployment as much as possible? What can we do to leverage a single image, standard deployments, deploy applications in a simplified manner, and also, get proper communications out to our end users so that they understand what's going on and why. So from a methodology perspective, that pretty much wraps up a generalized methodology. But then the next challenge that we see in organizations is how do we manage that whole process? And I recommend no matter what you choose to do with it is having some sort of a centralized database to drive the migration. Different organizations are different. Some organizations are larger and require a lot of different data points, a lot of applications, have hundreds and thousands of applications. And other organizations are simpler, maybe 1,000 devices and 30 applications, and it's a lot easier to manage. But regardless, have a centralized database of some kind, some sort of centralized repository. I always think companies, at least larger companies, that try to do migrations via Excel sheets and maybe SharePoint lists or something along those lines, it is really, really tough. That is a tough way to go. So generally speaking, this is a typical deployment workflow through the discovery phases, planning phases, design, build and test, and then deploy. And how do you manage that whole process through it? We're a big fan of a deployment database of some kind, which we've actually developed and honed over time. And tweaked, and it allows for more automation. It allows you to pull in and schedule devices. It ties the devices to the applications that are currently installed, and we'll go into some of that here in a minute. But whatever tool you use for managing it, I highly recommend that you look at some sort of a deployment workflow tool, and that will manage it from end to end. From hardware and scheduling the device to making sure it's compatible and Windows 10 ready. So what our tool does, and the reason why I'm showing this isn't to try to say you should contact Cortec for this kind of stuff, although that would be great. It's more to show you some of the things that you should look at and make sure that you have as part of it. So some sort of a deployment schedule where you can set you can set by device, by department, by building, by campus, what the actual deployment date is for the device. You need to look at the device hardware, and all this all ties together in a single record through Cortex deployment database, and ties the hardware replacement. Is there any hardware replacements that are required? Are they Win 10 approved? Are they not approved? What is the what exactly is the hardware requirements? That way you can look not just in the next month, you can look 6 months down the road and see how many devices you need to order to make sure you have enough hardware in so you're not waiting for that. Looking at application priority through the Cortex database, one of the things I'm a huge fan of is looking at what is the name of the application, what's the packaging status, or is it ready for deployment to Windows 10, and how many devices does that particular application impact? And that helps testing is complete. And then looking at things, mapping we call a was-is analysis, but there are other names out there. But bottom line is, what was the application in your Windows 7 environment, and what is the application in your Windows 10 environment? So many times you change different versions of Adobe Reader, different versions of EMR, PeopleSoft, potentially, right? Office versions, and various custom applications, right? Something that will track that from end to end, and then that way the old applications are associated to the workstation. The new applications are associated to the old application, and therefore you can see the readiness of particular devices, whether that be by department, campus, or whatever the case may be. Schedule. You can look at different date ranges, and you need to be looking at that. You need to say, okay, I've got my 10,000 devices scheduled over the next 2 years, and I know next month I've got 100 scheduled, the month after I've got 200 scheduled, the next month I've got 300 scheduled. You need to be able to look at your application readiness 3-6 months out to make sure that all those devices are ready to go, or you are working on those particular applications to enable.
Prioritize, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you prioritize your application based on your schedule? And then from a packaging perspective, track that Windows 10 readiness. And then this is really what it boils down to, is a deployment cut sheet, which is some sort of what's the old PC name, what's the new PC name, what printers are involved, where's the location. So if an engineer needs to go out, if you have to do a light touch model, it can go out. If they don't, then it's just about the PC names and doing a zero touch model, but giving them the ability to look at what's the old application, what's the new application.
Yep.
And being able to go
sign off from the customer, from the end user too, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a good way for you to track to make sure things are getting accomplished from a quality perspective.
Yep.
And then from a overall management perspective, you have a deployment dashboard. So being able to track and look at this holistically, being able to look at your machines that are scheduled, all that are completed, not only from a big picture, but also week by week. How many are scheduled? How many are completed in the last few months? And how many are scheduled in the near term? How many of them are actually ready for deployment, right? So how many have apps that are completely compatible and printers and hardware in and all that kind of stuff, so you can manage this in a simplified single view. So I definitely recommend having something along this lines that will help you from a management and overall methodology to drive success of your implementation. And specifically, these are the type of tools that I've leveraged to have many, many successful migrations over the years. So now it's time for questions and answers. Chris, do we have a question?
Yeah, actually, there's one here. Good question. So they were asking with that deployment migration database that we do. Like, what does it take to get that? What does it take to get that up and running for an organization?
Yeah, so it's actually a pretty easy tool. It's a web-based tool. It's IIS driven. So you need a SQL backend and infrastructure as a service, and contact us, and we can help you through that process.
Great. All right. I think that's all the questions we have so far. Maybe people might be still thinking about stuff, but please reach out to us, afterwards. If you have any other questions answered. We'll have our contact information up here in a second.
Yeah.
But what I want to go through first, just before we wrap everything up, is how to get there. We gave you methodologies, design considerations. Well, Microsoft knows that this does take some time to plan and to make sure that you're going to be successful. So what they've done is they've offered some funding and some offers to allow partners to help with this process of getting to Windows 10. In this way, it's called Accelerate Up, how to accelerate this deployment, right? And not make it last 3-4 years to try to get Windows 10 out there. So there's some programs specifically that I have here that particularly Cortec can provide. We've done most of these. There's some that are new. Like within weeks ago, they just released those top 2 for security briefing, which is huge for Windows 10 security features. That's really deep dive into that. Get the security team involved.
Sure.
That compatibility briefing. How do you deal with that compatibility? What are some things you can start doing now to mitigate some of those issues? the POC is great because it talks through all the different options through Windows 10, and you can get a plan, a really solid plan out of that. And then from the mobility and browser migration help along with that. The pilot is great too because a partner come in and help you do the testing, pilot out these devices, get them into production, and work through all those issues with the experience that partner brings to the table to really help you get there quicker.
Yep.
And then one other thing I didn't have on here was there's if you have an EA with Microsoft and software assurance, deployment planning services are a great tool that you probably have some of those days. You may or may not be using. A lot of customers don't realize they have them. It can be anyway 1 to 15-day engagement that's already paid for in your EA to have someone like Cortec come out and help you plan from Windows, Office, mobility, in addition to what you see here.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so let's wrap up now. It's almost at the top of the hour here. I appreciate everybody staying on with us. Hopefully this was valuable to you guys. But the key message here is start planning now. Yeah. Start thinking through this stuff. Get a partner engaged, somebody that can really help you lead through this, because we know you've got other projects going on. You're doing a lot of stuff. Leverage a great partner to come in and help you with that. So please feel free to contact us if you have any further questions. You want to know more about some of these tools that we mentioned, any of our other experiences. We'd be glad to talk to you, reach out to you, give you some demos, whatever you'd like. But yeah.
Or if you even have any questions and just want to bounce ideas off of us, feel free to reach out to Chris or I via LinkedIn.
Yeah, that would be great. So again, hopefully this was valuable. I thank everybody for joining us today.
Thank you for your time.